Back here at home on this Memorial Day, hundreds packed into the Omaha National Cemetery.
As part of the ceremony, the presentation of the wreaths honoring the 6 branches of the military, in addition to Merchant Marines and POWMIA. As 6 News' Brian Mastery reports, today is all about remembering the fallen.
That's a refueling tanker aircraft, a KC-135, flying over the Omaha National Cemetery on this Memorial Day.
We're doing about just a little bit under 1,000 interments a year.
Jason Dolan is a U.S. Army veteran and director of the cemetery. This place doesn't yet have the history since it's only been open for 7 years. But talking with families, it's beginning to look and feel like the hallowed grounds of the Arlington National Cemetery in Virginia.
Today he would have been putting up the flags and taking those flags down.
Angie Proctor is talking about her dad, David Proctor. He served in Vietnam in the Gulf War. He died in 2020. His family says there was nothing but green space behind his marker 3 years ago, and now. Angie and her mother, Linda Proctor, spent Memorial Day remembering the fallen. They brought flowers to the veteran's gravesite today. If he were alive, his wife said, he'd still be volunteering in Fremont on this day and the Avenue of Flags.
He died 2 years ago today.
Kathy Mosman came to the Omaha National Cemetery with some of her family to honor her late husband, Army vet Larry Mosman. He was part of the Legion Honor Guard in Columbus and participated in 550 ceremonies. I asked her if the youngest generation understands the acts of valor and sacrifice all around and represented here on Memorial Day.
I really think they get it. They're learning, and that's the important part, that they learn what went on and what it costs.
More veterans and their families are skipping burials and getting cremated these days. Because of that, construction is underway where crews are building more columbariums, revered spots to store urns. The director believes they'll now have the space for up to 150,000 to one day call this their final resting place. On your side at the Omaha National Cemetery, Brian Mastery, 6 News.
And the Proctor family is putting on a second annual Dave Proctor Memorial Veterans Benefit. It's Saturday, June 17th at the Disabled American Veterans in Fremont. And money raised in the poker run and putt-putt golf tournament benefit his passion project, the Avenue of Flags. Fentanyl